The first passenger terminal at Heathrow was opened by the Queen, and on September the 22nd, ITV was launched, and it aired the UK's first ever TV advert, and this is it.
It's Gibbs SR toothpaste, the tingling fresh toothpaste that does your gums good too.
Well, since then, whether you find them infuriating or unforgettable, they've been a part of all our lives. Emma Simpson looks back on 60 years of television adverts. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. European Union leaders are meeting in Brussels this afternoon to try to thrash out details of plans agreed by ministers last night to resettle 120,000 migrants in Europe. But there's fierce opposition from some member states. The Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia have all voted against the plans. Britain is the only country that has opted out of them. Our Europe correspondent Chris Morris reports from Brussels. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. European Union leaders are meeting in Brussels this afternoon to try to thrash out details of plans agreed by ministers last night to resettle 120,000 migrants in Europe. But there's fierce opposition from some member states. The Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia have all voted against the plans. Britain is the only country that has opted out of them. Our Europe correspondent Chris Morris reports from Brussels. While leaders prepare for talks in Brussels, the flow of migrants into the EU continues. Germany is among the nations that most seem to want to reach, but even Germany is now struggling with the numbers. In a moment, we'll hear from Jenny Hill, who's in a town on the German border which says it is running out of space. But first, Matthew Price reports from the Greek island of Lesbos, where there are reports of more than 2,500 people arriving by boat. Now, after the biggest shock in Rugby World Cup history, Japan are back in action this afternoon when they take on Scotland. Japan beat two-time world champions South Africa at the weekend with a last-minute try. It's Scotland's opening game of the tournament, and they have won all four of their previous encounters with Japan. They play in Gloucester with kickoff at 2:30. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss is there. Andy. Now, after the biggest shock in Rugby World Cup history, Japan are back in action this afternoon when they take on Scotland. Japan beat two-time world champions South Africa at the weekend with a last-minute try. It's Scotland's opening game of the tournament, and they have won all four of their previous encounters with Japan. They play in Gloucester with kickoff at 2:30. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss is there. Andy. Two jailed Al Jazeera journalists, Mohammed Fahmy and Baha Mohammed, are reported to have been given a presidential pardon in Egypt. The two men, together with the former BBC journalist Peter Grester, were jailed for allegedly aiding terrorism through their reporting. Their case sparked a worldwide press freedom campaign in an effort to secure their freedom. Pope Francis has been greeted by President Obama at the start of an official visit to America. It's the first time he has ever travelled to the United States. He will spend 6 days in the country, during which he'll greet millions of American Catholics and address a joint session of Congress. Our Washington correspondent Gary O'Donoghue has more. Duke of Cambridge and Prince Harry have joined forces with the BBC's DIY SOS team to help turn a derelict street in Manchester into homes for ex-service personnel. An entire street is being renovated and will include a support centre for wounded veterans. The princes are hoping to highlight the challenges that service personnel face when they leave the forces. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. At least 450 people have been crushed to death in a stampede at the annual Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. It's the worst tragedy of its kind there since 1990. Hundreds more were injured in the crush in Mina, a valley around 3 miles from the holy city of Mecca. Around 2 million people are taking part in this year's Hajj. It's not known if any of the victims are British, but the Foreign Office says it's in contact with the authorities there. Our correspondent Frank Gardner has the latest. Now, it's the world's most powerful racing car, and it's been unveiled publicly for the first time today. The Bloodhound is a supersonic racer, and it's been designed to reach speeds of 1,000 miles an hour. It's hoped the British-built car will shatter the world land speed record, which currently stands at 763 miles an hour. The car's on display in London, and our correspondent John Maguire has been to have a look. And women from around the world who were awarded the George Cross and the George Medal have gathered in London to celebrate the award's 75th anniversary. They were introduced by King George VI in 1940 at the height of the Blitz to recognise the many courageous deeds being performed by civilians. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell reports. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The iron and steel making plant at Redcar on Teesside is to be mothballed with the loss of around 1,700 jobs. The Thai-owned company SSI UK blamed a severe slump in steel prices but held out the prospect that operations could resume in the future. Union leaders have urged the government to intervene. Now, stargazers in many parts of the world were treated to this last night, a lunar eclipse combined with a so-called supermoon. These images were taken from Kingston in Surrey, and this other one was snapped in the early hours of this morning from Staffordshire. This was a rare astronomical phenomenon seen for the first time since 1982 and visible in North and South America, West Africa and Western Europe. It won't occur again until 2033. Our science correspondent Palak Ghosh reports. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Surgeons in London have developed a groundbreaking procedure to treat one of the major causes of sight loss. Doctors at Moorfields Eye Hospital are using human stem cells to treat age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. If successful, it could transform the lives of thousands of people every year in the UK. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports. Vladimir Putin says Russia would consider conducting airstrikes against Islamic State targets if approved by the United Nations. President Obama and the Russian leader met for 90 minutes and agreed on the need for a political solution in Syria, but failed to resolve their differences on the future of President Assad. Mr. Putin described the meeting in New York as surprisingly frank. Barbara Pletasher reports. British World War II veterans have been awarded France's highest military distinction, the Légion d'honneur, at a ceremony in London. They're being recognised for their role in the liberation of Europe. Many were just teenagers at the time and took part in the D-Day landings in June 1944. President Hollande has promised to recognise every survivor who helped liberate France. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Merseyside police have launched a manhunt after a police officer was killed after being hit by a stolen pickup truck in the early hours of this morning. He's been named as 34-year-old PC David Phillips, who was married with 2 young children. Police had been called to a burglary at an estate agent's in Birkenhead. PC Phillips was hit when he tried to stop the vehicle as a patrol car gave chase. Our correspondent Danny Savage has the latest. Islamic State militants in Syria have destroyed another part of the ancient city Palmyra. They've blown up a Roman arch which was almost 2,000 years old. So-called Islamic State seized the World Heritage Site in May. Since then, they've also reduced 2 famous temples to rubble. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.